Welcome to LC Screen Talk. My name is Larry, and this is my top 10 tag video in which I share my favorite film from every genre, or at least many genres. So I was tagged as part of this top 10 tag going around FilmTube, in which so many of my friends have already shared their favorite films from every genre, or at least the 10 that were included in the original tag. Now, I want to give a huge shout out to the two people who have tagged me, both the movie Apprentice and Mainely movies. Thank you all so much for thinking of me and hopefully wanting to hear my opinion on this. Now, I will say I'm going to be using the three additional categories that Alyssa from Mainly Movies used in her video. I've actually seen several different iterations. My friend Brett over at BamTube TV added a whole lot of extra categories. And I've seen several people pick and choose and add in these new genres, but I'm going to stick to the original 10 plus the three new that Alyssa included, in which I believe she got from Luke Harefield, who tagged her. So sharing in on these tags is just a fun way to build community and help support all of our fellow FilmTube channels. So if you see someone else out there who has completed their favorite films from every genre video, make sure to give it a watch, click like, hit subscribe, and let's support all within our little FilmTube family. And since it feels like I'm the last person in this community to actually film this video, I'm not going to specifically tag anyone, but if you're watching this, I would love to hear your favorite film from within each of these genres, either in the comment section down below, or of course, make your own video and share it with me so I can head on over and give it a watch. Now, let's get into the actual categories, starting off with science fiction. So I'm cheating just a little bit right off the bat because the film I'm including here, I personally actually consider to be just a tad bit more fantasy than I do sci-fi. However, it has enough science fiction elements in it that I needed to give it recognition here, and that is Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, one of, if not my favorite film of all time. I adore the sequel to the phenomenon that was Star Wars, with a darker story, more intense stakes for all of our characters that at this point we had already grown to love. The effects were so far improved from the original. Obviously, it included the greatest reveal in cinematic history. Plus, this is the film we were introduced to, the Imperial March, which just happens to be my personal favorite piece of music from the Star Wars universe. Everything about this film is pitch perfect, and that's what makes it my favorite science fiction flick. Next up, we have the horror genre. And if you watch this channel, you know I quite love the horror genre. However, picking my favorite scary movie actually isn't all that difficult. We're going with a classic here, and my pick is The Exorcist. What can I say? It's one of the most highly regarded horror films, the first ever horror film to get a Best Picture nomination for a reason. It's fantastic. Those practical effects still hold up to today. The makeup done in this film is spectacular. The character building is handled so well. We spend such a great deal with this family before we get to the penultimate possession. And when we do get there, no punches are held back. It goes balls to the wall with some horrific imagery, iconically savage lines, and easily the best possession film we've gotten to date. And clearly, my pick still for the best horror movie of all time. Next up, we have the most dominant movie category of the current age, and that is comic book films. Now, comic book films is a very loose genre, I'd say. It's kind of an adaptation subgenre rather than a genre in and of itself, because comic book films encompass so much, and so often a comic book film can be specifically tailored to a broader genre. But the general category is adapted from a comic book series, and this one was especially difficult. There are so many quality comic book films that have come out since the big renaissance that started with the X-Men in the early 2000s. However, I'm going to go for a pick that has heavily fallen out of favor, and my favorite is The Avengers, the OG Joss Whedon, I know, film that first brought our Marvel heroes together. I think it beautifully balances the humor and reverence that I love in the Marvel Cinematic Universe with big, high stakes action. The special effects are fantastic. These characters are so well understood and they intermingle together beautifully. Plus, we had never seen anything on this scale, a crossover like this. It was an event that I will honestly never forget, and it still holds that special, special place in my heart. Not to mention, I like my superheroes to be super. I like powers on display. I love that team up aspect, and it's all done beautifully here. So The Avengers is still my personal favorite comic book film. Next up, we have comedy. Now, talk about a hit or miss genre for me. So much comedy just falls flat, dead on arrival. And there's some meaner streak type of comedy that others don't love that I seem to connect with. And it's such a broad category with so many different styles and types of comedy to choose from that narrowing this down to my favorite was quite the challenge. But I decided to go with another classic, and I'm going to say my favorite comedy of all time is Young Frankenstein, the peak of Mel Brooks's career in my eyes. We have Gene Wilder at his absolute best with an all-star cast around him. Obviously, we have iconic moments that are still quoted to this day. The visual gags are hilarious, and the spoof on Frankenstein's monster is just handled so well. I laugh every time, no matter how many times I've seen it, and it's just executed perfectly. Next up, we have action, which is integrated into a lot of the other genres quite often. So I elected to try and narrow this down to a pure action film. And I have to say, I wasn't alive in the 80s, though I do enjoy many of the 80s classics. That subgenre of 80s high testosterone style of action movies don't quite hold that nostalgia with me like I know they do so many others. Thus, I settled on a film that came out within the past decade, and my personal favorite action film of all time is Mad Max Fury Road. Talk about high octane, pure adrenaline action from start to finish. These practical effects that are used here are insane. George Miller returns to the franchise and blows all of the other Mad Max films out of the water with this one. The concepts, the costuming, the hair and makeup, everything about it is iconic. And then we get this amazing message with Furiosa and these women taking down the patriarchy in the film. Oh, I love absolutely everything about Mad Max Fury Road. Honestly, a perfect action film to me. Up next, we have probably the broadest genre there is, and that is the drama genre. Now, dramas encompass so much, including enveloping so many of these other categories, including enveloping so many other genres pretty often. So narrowing down my favorite drama was particularly difficult just because of how broad a category it is. But ultimately, I decided to go with Fight Club, the David Fincher classic. I know, how film bro of me, right? But what can I say? It's still my favorite David Fincher film to date. I think Brad Pitt and Edward Norton are fantastic, as is Helena Bonham Carter. And I love a film that really subverts what you're expecting and delivers a deeper message. And this one takes on hypermasculinity in such a fantastic way and in such a subverted way that dude bros still think it actually is reinforcing what they're saying, when in actuality, clearly, it's a takedown of that type of behavior and culture. But the twist is amazing and is one of those fantastic twists that actually enhances your viewing experience once you rewatch. Everything about Fight Club is amazing. Talk about iconic still to this day. I love it. Next up, we have romance, which by and large is not one of my favorite genres. However, I tend to enjoy films that purely focus on the romance rather than dragging down films of other genres with needless and unnecessary romance. And I will say, I must connect with it somewhat because several of the past few years, a romance has actually been my #1 film of the year, including my pick for my favorite romance of all time, Call Me By Your Name. A true romance through and through. Call Me By Your Name mixes a coming of age with romance to build this beautiful film that just lavishes you in this stunning Italian countryside, making you, the viewer, fall in love with the film itself as you watch. And I know Armie Hammer, oof, yikes, but he and Timothée Chalamet have amazing chemistry. Michael Stuhlbarg delivers a fantastic performance with one of the greatest movie speeches of all time. It's heavily erotic without ever crossing the line into being explicit or exploitative. And the original music used here is amazing. Everything about it just screams lush romance in every shape or form, and it gives me one of my favorite movie endings of all time. It's one of my favorite films of all time. What can I say? Next up, we have adventure, which I actually think is kind of a strange category because do we ever see adventure just on its own? I feel like it's always action adventure, honestly, but here we are. And narrowing this one down was also really difficult because I feel like adventure is always the second genre in a film. It's hard to find pure adventure movies. So I ended up going with a horror thriller adventure and selecting Jurassic Park. The first time I watched this film, I was awestruck and ran to the toy store to grab as many dinosaurs off the shelf as I could. And that just completely enhances the adventure sense of this. As we go through Jurassic Park itself as a viewer, you feel like you are on this very special adventure in this amazing world. The animatronics are fantastic and still hold up to this day, looking so much better than most all visual effects that are coming out in the year 2020. The characters are fantastic. The interpersonal communications work very well. The horror elements are amazing. What is there to say about Jurassic Park? It's fantastic. Next up, I have Western, which is probably my least favorite genre. I'm just going to say it now. These films had a very prominent time in the sun, and the classics just never intrigued me, and the ones I did see are good and I can respect what they do, but it's just not a genre I've ever particularly loved. So I have to be a little bit basic, a little bit generic, and pick a newer Western to the genre and go with Django Unchained. One of my favorite Quentin Tarantino films, Leonardo DiCaprio, Samuel L. Jackson, Jamie Foxx, and Christoph Waltz all are amazing in this film. It has all of the hallmarks, minus maybe so much of the feet, which I can definitely do without, of a Quentin Tarantino film. It's brutal, it's fun, it's funny, and it does deliver on a little bit more of that social commentary than Tarantino typically does. It's certainly one of the most entertaining Westerns I've ever seen, and that pretty much qualifies it for my favorite. All right, the last of the 10 genres that were originally included, we have animation, which in fact is not a movie genre, but rather a storytelling medium in which any type of genre, any type of story can be told through the medium of animation. But since it was included, and I happen to love animation as an art form and movie telling device, I was more than happy to oblige and include it here in my list. And, well, you might have guessed by my outfit here today, but my favorite animated film of all time is Beauty and the Beast. Now, I have done a ranking of my top 50 favorite animated films of all time, And I'm pretty sure I've included Beauty and the Beast several times. I've done a top 5 Disney movies. We've talked a lot about Beauty and the Beast and my favorite animated films here on the channel. But what can you say about it? It's stunning. It's beautiful. I find it to be perfect in every single way. The very first animated film to ever be nominated for Best Picture, and the only one who was able to make the cut with only 5 nominees. It's amazing. And now for the 3 genres that were included from Luke Harefield and Mainely movies, we're kicking off with musicals, another genre that I'm very hit or miss on. Now, when it comes to animated musicals, I'm in love. It was ingrained in me from a very early age. Animated musicals are the jam. But when coming up with my favorite musical of all time, I would rather at least give the nod to a live action musical, the big musical numbers breaking up the story. So yes, technically Beauty and the Beast is my favorite musical, but for this list, we're going with The Wizard of Oz. What can I say? Somewhere Over the Rainbow is still the best song from a film to date. Judy Garland is absolutely amazing in the film itself, and it's a little bit light on the music aspect, which may be why I like it more. And it doesn't fall into some of the tropes that the others do, I would say, but the practical effects still look so good for a film that's nearly 100 years old at this point. The acting is fantastic, the messages are beautiful, and the world that was created is amazing. Next, I have fantasy, which certainly should have been included in the first 10 because I am a fantasy nut. I love fantasy films, and honestly, find myself being quite forgiving of even bad fantasy movies. But my favorite fantasy film of all time would have to go to Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. Once again, I know, I'm basic, oh well. But Lord of the Rings, Return of the King is perfect across the board in every way. Honestly, the entire Lord of the Rings trilogy is perfect in every way across the board. And they were intended as one long film, so I guess we could just plug Lord of the Rings trilogy into this slot. But Return of the King particularly is able to balance out big, epic, fantasy-style action with really small, delicate, dramatic moments, these character moments. We have a lot of arcs that need to be wrapped up, and they are all given beautifully satisfying endings. We have scary moments. Everything is included here, and it's all handled perfectly well. And then finally, we have the thriller genre, another one that is so hard to pinpoint because thriller is added into so many other things, and very rarely do you find a film that's only classified as a thriller alone. So ultimately, I decided to go with one of my favorite thrillers of the past decade and have selected Nightcrawler, the criminally underawarded Nightcrawler here. Jake Gyllenhaal gives my favorite performance of his throughout his entire career that is full of amazing performances, but it's a dark film that really gets down to the nitty-gritty of success and human nature. This is my introduction to Riz Ahmed, and I fell in love with him instantly. He's so fantastic, and his dynamic with Jake Gyllenhaal's character is amazing. Rene Russo kills it. The cinematography is stunning. The music used is amazing. And the script is so tight. I love everything about Nightcrawler. So that's it. Those are my favorite films from each of the movie genres. I hope you enjoyed my video. If you did, go ahead, click like down below and subscribe to the channel so you are always up to date on my latest videos. Also, make sure to join in on the discussion. What are your favorite films from each of these genres? Let me know either in the comment section down below, or you can hit me up on Twitter, or of course, make your own video and make sure to tag me so I can go and support it. I love you all so much for your continued support. Mwah! Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.